Tonight on Joy News Prime, push for sanctions against government officials irresponsible for massive dissipation of billions of COVID-19 funds, as discovered by the Auditor General.
That is saying refer the fund should go ahead, serve them with notice of intention to disallow and surcharge them. If they are not happy, they should go to court.
We'll hear more from Daniel Domelovo, immediate past Auditor General, who says his successor must do far more than just audit. Plus, we interrogate why some of the auditors' numbers conflict with the finance ministries. And also this evening, the minority in Parliament is raising fresh concerns about the government's gold for oil deal. They insist the deal is shrouded in secrecy.
We are calling on government to halt this so-called gold for oil barter and consult further.
Much later, cocoa bills invested to get their monies by close of the week. That's the assurance from the Bank of Ghana. At the top of the hour 8, we have business with Mami Sinyamiche Thompson.
In business, we'll hear from an economist who says the mismanagement of COVID-19 funds could have a negative impact on the ongoing IMF negotiations.
This report is just going to show that it's not just that, we've had the external shocks, but we've also mismanaged the funds that we had. So it makes it more difficult for government to make a convincing case that our debt should be forgiven.
Musbao will come up at 8:15 with Prime Sports.
Well, tributes pour in for former GFA President MND Jaola following his demise in the United States after a short illness.
This is your home of independent, fearless and credible journalism. We're Joy News. We're coming up shortly with all the details. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. In our very first story in this edition, the jaw-dropping revelations in the latest Auditor General report into the use of billions of COVID-19 funds are fueling demands for immediate sanctions against government officials responsible for much of the dissipation. The Auditor General found many cases where the total of 21.8 billion cedis mobilized to mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in Ghana was simply misused. In one case, the Auditor General flags what he calls a possible case of financial loss totaling $81 million worth of vaccines were paid but never received. We are learning that in spite of this potential loss with the vaccine still not delivered, the government has this year budgeted more funds to import vaccines. More on all that shortly, but first, the immediate past Auditor General, Daniel Domelovo, is demanding sanctions against government officials found to have dissipated the funds. He's been speaking to my colleague Blessed Soga on The Pulse.
As to why there is no disallowance or surcharges recently, I think the best person to answer that should be the Auditor General. Remember, the Constitution under Article 1A7 Clause 7B provides that the Auditor General in the performance of his function can disallow any item, in fact, he used the word may, disallow any item of expenditure which is contrary to law and surcharge the people responsible. And that is what I sought to do, because I thought if there are no consequences for the infractions, the culture of impunity will continue. So that is what I sought to do. And I know for sure that the current Auditor General, Mr. Johnson Asiedu Ekuamwa, is more than capable of doing the same. Maybe he may have some challenges which I am not aware of, but I think that by the time I left office, the mechanisms and the institutional arrangements were in place which he can use to do same.
Yeah, but you want him to go ahead and surcharge, do you?
Of course, yes. In fact, I was waiting to hear that following this report, these people who are misusing money have been surcharged. Because if we don't do that, we can continuously audit. He can send his people 1,001 times on the field, but we will continue getting these infractions. And even people get emboldened because they think that nothing is going to happen as a result of this audit. So it is my wish and my expectation that those that is saying refer the fund should go ahead, serve them with notice of intention to disallow and surcharge them. If they are not happy, they should go to court. It doesn't matter whether they go to court or they don't go to court. It is quite deterrent. And if they go to court, well, they may win, they may not win. The Auditor General may lose some of the cases, may win some of the cases, but that is the name of the game.
So that's the immediate past Auditor General Daniel Domelevo there speaking earlier. My colleague with the research desk, Kofi J. Minta, is joining us now as we scrutinize the Auditor General's report more closely on this. So, Kofi, we know there's an outstanding $81 million to recover, but we are learning that there are some concerns budgeted to spend in the 2023. Walk us through what exactly it is the details are.
Right. So, in fact, we've been gleaning data from the 2023 budget, and we realized that a government in 2023, which is this year, will spend close to 1.8 million Ghana cedis on vaccine procurement. If you look at COVID-19 operations, for instance, also around somewhere 2.8 billion. If you add the two, government has budgeted to spend close to 4.3 billion, million cedis on COVID-19 expenditure in 2023.
Well, you've been taking a look at this particular Auditor General's report and the key findings and the worrying situation that has been raised from it. Walk us through some of the findings.
We've been looking at some difference or discrepancy between what the Finance Minister reported to Parliament on June 2022 and what the Auditor General report is also saying. So if you look at what government mobilized in terms of COVID-19 expenditure was around, Auditor General is saying it's around 19.11 billion, Ghana cedis. And if you look at what the Finance Minister reported was around 18, billion. But the difference around 190 million, Ghana cedis. And the Finance Minister actually listed 9 sources that they got this COVID-19 money from. Okay. We're talking about the contingency fund. You can find it on the screen. This, as of 2020, that's how much government actually got from for COVID-19 support. 19.30 billion, Ghana cedis. In 2020, we had close to, 6 billion cedis from the IMF. We had World Bank about 1.33 billion Ghana cedis. European Union, 504 million Ghana cedis. And African Development Bank close to 106 million Ghana cedis. The total is around 19.3 million Ghana cedis. But if you look at what the Auditor General reported versus what the Finance Minister gave to Parliament, the Finance Minister said they were able to mobilize 19.3 billion Ghana cedis. Auditor General report is reporting 19.11 billion. If you do the math, the difference is around 190 million Ghana cedis. For the sources, the Auditor General report stated 6 sources, but we see the Finance Minister, when he presented his statement to Parliament, citing 9 sources. The Auditor General report left out, monies that we received from the Korean government, monies that we received from the German government, and government of Ghana's own, funding for the COVID-19 expenditure. So we've also been looking at amounts, realized for the 2 period that we're talking about. So the Auditor General report is quoting 15.6 billion Ghana cedis for COVID-19 related expenditure. They said if you look at the actual expenditure, it's around 12.04 billion Ghana cedis. That's according to the Finance Minister. The Auditor General report is reporting 12.23 billion Ghana cedis. Let's do the math. The math's around the same 190 million, Ghana cedis. Probably it could be that, the Finance Ministry cited 9 sources. The Auditor General's report is currently, outlining just 6 sources. So the difference is 3. That's why probably you may see the 19.3 exactly. The 19.3. And also, if you look at expenditure on COVID-19 for 2020, the Auditor General report is reporting 8.66 billion. Finance Ministry, 8.12 billion. There's quite, some significant difference there. 2021, the same thing happened. Auditor General, 3.08 billion. Finance Ministry, 3.91 billion. So if you look at the 2 report, we can see some significant difference between
differences.
what the Auditor General reported and what the
Finance
Finance
Ministry
Minister
reported to Parliament. Okay, Kofi, thank you so much for joining us, as always, breaking down all the figures to us. We have some news coming in. I'll be bringing you details of that shortly when it comes to the Domestic Debt Exchange Program. There's an official communication to that. But we've been speaking to Kwame Sapong-Esiedu, who is a senior fellow with CDD, reactions to this, questioning, maintaining that there are some questions or more questions that government needs to answer when it comes to dissipation of the COVID-19 funds.
Look at, an insurance scheme was set up for health workers, which could not be executed if the insurers defaulted. How can that even be? You see things given to traditional rulers who cannot account for the money. How can that be? The more you go into this report, the more you see that all the questions that were being asked at the outset when COVID started as to the expenditure has not been dealt with earlier on, simply because there was more going on and on and on in the background. So anytime the question was asked, it was pushed. And like you heard Minta Akando say, there are a lot more questions to be asked that do not fall within the remit of the Auditor General. And the more questions you ask, the more mess you see. What if not is a facade? We were pulled a smoke screen, things were done in the dark, and suddenly we are finding out the gravity of the mess. And I heard your colleague say 3.1 billion US dollars. Now we're going for 3 billion from the IMF. Meanwhile, you read the report and it says only 25% of that 3.1 billion was actually used in the fight against COVID. 75% was spent at the discretion of government. And then when you look at that 25%, you also see the amount of sleaze and anomalies that the Auditor General has identified, which tells you that less than 20% of those monies were actually used to fight COVID. Meanwhile, we are being told that this is the expenditure that has sent our economy down the drain and has led us to the IMF. In those expenditures, you can also see they are talking about COVID bonds that were sold to us. Now we are being told that there should be a debt exchange program because those bonds cannot be honored. What is a facade, Evans? And these are the reasons why I'm saying that this was a huge smoke screen to actually plunder the state. And I don't take anything away from what I said then.
So we've had both the chairman and the ranking on the Parliamentary Committee on Health say next week, the 7th of February, they're beginning a public hearing. What do you make of that process? Should we leave Parliament to of course, this is an Auditor General's report, so eventually Parliament will have to deal with it. But then there's also another committee that's going to look into it before the Public Accounts Committee gets its bite. Would you recommend that to be the process of getting finality and closure to this? Or there should be more done to this particular issue?
We cannot even continue this whole thing where no one is held to account. All these reports come out, people read it, we shout, and that's the end of it. People have to be held accountable for these monies.
So that's Kwame Sapong-Esiedu there. We follow closely what becomes of this particular report from the Auditor General. And I've been telling you about the latest development on the Domestic Debt Exchange Program. We've been bringing you news all day about some exemptions that were to happen. There's an official communication, and Joy Business editor George Wiafe joins me in studio with the current developments. George, you've been giving us details all day. Now a confirmation of all that you've been putting out.
Yes, so the Ghana Association of Bankers and the Ministry of Finance, acting on behalf of the government of Ghana, has reached a deal with respect to the commercial banks actively going forward or taking that significant progress towards the signing of the Domestic Debt Exchange Program. Okay. And if you go through the statement that jointly signed by the President or the Chief Executive, the Ghana Association of Bankers and the Ministry of Finance, one critical thing that it states is that government is going to offer. I mean, let's go through the statement and say the government of Ghana and the Ghana Association of Bankers have made significant progress in terms of participation of the banks in the Domestic Debt Exchange Program. The agreement emphasizes on the final improvement of terms of the Domestic Debt Exchange Program, namely A, an agreement to pay 5% coupon on 2023 and the single coupon rate for each of the 12 new bonds, resulting in an effective coupon rate of 9%. Now, clearly, he also talks about the clarity on the operational framework in terms of access to Ghana's Financial Stability Fund, that is the GFS. Now, removal, and this was very critical, because we understand that one of the reasons why this whole domestic debt exchange program was extended was because the banks were vehemently opposed to the agreement the government presented to them first. So now we understand that the removal or the amendment of all clauses in the exchange memorandum that empowers the Republic of Ghana at its sole discretion to vary the terms of the exchange. So whatever that government reaches now with the banks is infinito, that whichever government comes later is bounded to agree to those terms that has been reached. The Ghana Bank Association, recognizing the progress made, notes that participation of its members' banks that is in the domestic debt exchange program per these new terms is subject to individual banks' internal governance and approval process in any case not later than January 30, 2023. This is a significant milestone towards addressing Ghana's economic challenges and will thus help to restore macroeconomic stability, accelerate Ghana's economic growth. With this achievement, government of Ghana reiterates its commitment in concluding this domestic debt exchange program on time with all the other stakeholders. And this was issued by the Ministry of Finance, and it was signed jointly by the Ghana Association of Bankers and the Finance Ministry, acting on behalf of the government of Ghana, Emefa.
Well, some headway there. Earlier also, you've been talking about the exemption, possible exemption of the pensioners. You know, they've been raising concerns about the inclusion of them in the domestic debt exchange program.
Emefa, you're right on that one. Now, that is what we understand government will be going to the table in trying to reach a deal with these individual bondholders. You understand that there is the likelihood that government might exempt persons above 65 years, as well as pensioners on this scheme, and also come up with some improved benefit for them as well. But that would be for just the pension, the holders, as well as those who are above. As of now, it is still early days yet to get those fine details that government will propose to those individual bondholders. There could be the likelihood that they could get a little bit more than what the banks are getting, or maybe the same thing as well. But don't forget the caveat in all this thing that the Ghana Association of Bankers has reached. It says that all the individual banks reserve the right to go back to their shareholders for approval. So if 7 banks come back and they say that, well, the coupon payment that you were offering of 5% wasn't good enough, do something about it. So it is a never say never thing. And I think that the agreement was carefully crafted to say that it's still too early days yet to see that the books have been closed when it comes to the commercial banks and the government of Ghana. And Emefa, I'll tell you that one of the reasons why this thing was extended was because of the commercial banks. So if government has been able to reach this agreement with them, then maybe government might be getting that 80% it was looking forward to classify this exchange program as successful. But don't forget the individual bondholders are also saying that they want a total exemption.
They have a number of about 400,000 now, so we'll see how it goes.
So let's see how things pan out. So never say never, but the government has made a significant progress towards having this whole domestic debt exchange program thing being classified as maybe successful, maybe.
Joy Business Editor George, we are for giving us all the inside scoop when it comes to the domestic debt exchange program. George, thank you so much for joining us. Let's stay a while longer on issues regarding these bills and bonds and amongst others, because we are told that investors should get their monies by the close of week. That's the assurance from the Bank of Ghana after unilaterally directing banks to roll over returns on the 182-day cocoa bills last Thursday. Expectant customers who purchased the bills went to retrieve their investments last Friday, only to be informed that there's been a unilateral rollover following a BOG directive. Well, listen to one of the customers who spoke to Evans Mensah on Friday.
It's cocoa bill. So the short story is cocoa bill. It's matured yesterday, and when it's matured, the funds were deposited in the account. And I decided to go to the bank today And when I went there today, the money had been taken out of the account. And when I asked, the tellers were not able to tell me anything. They just said that it's a directive that has come for all the funds to be automatically rolled over. And I was asking that, if money has come into an account, I have a contract with the account that money should be deposited in the account. I don't have any contract with the bank that money will be taken out of the account without my permission. And that has happened. Why should it happen? And they say that is a directive, and there's little they can tell me than to say that there was a directive that all the money should be rolled over automatically. And I was very surprised because we were told that T-bills were not going to be touched, and cocoa bills, if T-bills are not going to be touched, cocoa bills were even more safer because it's a cocoa bond instrument. So I was just shocked. So that's exactly what happened, and even the certificate for the rollover, I don't have it, and I don't know what I can even do about it because it's something that I had planned that I was going to pay my wife's school fees with, and now I don't even know how to even go and break the news to my wife because I told her that it's going to happen, but it is what it is.
Well, the BOG has been explaining what economists have described as a blunder, considering the existing apprehension in the financial sector because of the current debt exchange program. The central bank says it expects that the short-term cash flow challenges facing Cocoa Board will be resolved soon to enable the cocoa regulator meet its obligations to investors. Stephen Opata is the Director of Financial Markets at the Bank of Ghana. He first explains to Joy News the thought process behind the unilateral rollover directive last Thursday.
This particular auction was severely undersubscribed by 855.42 million. And you also write in previous times there were some undersubscriptions and had to come in to fill the gap. But Bank of Ghana, as you know, is a central bank, and typically when you fill in a gap, then it means that you are financing the gap. And that can also have implications for monetary policy management. So management look at the situation, and this time around, decided that it has to be done differently. In other words, the shortfall has to be financed, not from Bank of Ghana. So that's the first point I want to raise. And we had a meeting with the banks and Cocoa Board to look at a way of addressing this significant shortfall. So at that meeting, it was agreed that for the institutional investors, they roll over their investment so that at least the shortfall will be minimized. And for those individuals who bought the bill, we also agreed that Cocoa Board will look for other financing from deposits that it has with some of the banks to clear. So that's what happened.
Okay, so the interest for many of these investors is the actual timelines that has been communicated from the BOG to the Cocoa Board as to when exactly these returns will be paid, because most of them have made plans for this particular returns only to be told that it's been rolled over unilaterally by the BOG.
So in terms of timelines for the individuals who invested in this instrument, this cocoa bill, currently we're working with the CSD, looking at the data and seeing the quantum of individuals who were affected by this. I think that exercise is going on right now. Once we ascertain that, we are working with Cocoa Board to look at its balances with the various banks and see how we can quickly pay these individuals.
Well, he further addresses the concern about the regulatory lapses on the part of the BOG for not flagging the sale of the bills to retail customers of those institutional investors.
When these bills are being issued, we send out a notice to banks. And banks are invited to bid for the subscription of the cocoa bills. Actually, this happens on a particular day. So, for example, the one we're talking about, it happened on Thursday, and this must be electronically submitted through an auction model not later than 1 p.m. on that day. And then settlement takes place the same day. Now, the notice spells out clearly that banks are eligible to participate. But it appears that some banks were aggregating, that is, they were pulling resources together from their clients and bringing it to the auction. So it looks like it was a gray area, and now that we've seen this, we will take steps to make sure that this is clarified and cleaned up.
Well, senior lecturer with the University of Ghana Business School, Dr. Benjamin Amwa, wants Cocoa Board and the banks to come clear on the development. He spoke on the probe last night.
This shouldn't have happened in the first place, because if you have followed the cocoa bills, it started all the way back in 2002. And from 2002, Cocoa Board, and of course with the assistance of Bank of Ghana, has been issuing these bills to the public as and when they need funds based on their forecasts and their cash flow position. So this has not happened where Cocoa Board will default. Technically, what has happened is a default, but the timing of this default, is what creates the concern and the tension that we have in the system. For almost about 6 months now, we have been talking about the debt to GDP position, debt to government revenue position, and how it has now become a debt exchange program. And we are still discussing the issues surrounding it. We have not resolved it. We have been told that T-bills, and this is the word, T-bills are not part. So that is fair. But the cocoa bill itself is a bill. It is 91 and 182. So that is a short-term fund for Cocoa Board, and then also for investors who desire to have short-term return. They see the cocoa bill, aside the T-bill, as an option to use to manage their liquidity position. That is, if they want to invest for the short term. Now, strangely enough, we are not too clear about whether this whole decision is backed by or supported or being enforced as a result of the debt exchange program. So,
well, still on the same show, a private legal practitioner, Bobby Bansing, questions the decision by financial institutions to debit the account of customers without their explicit consent.
Once the money hits your account and you get the alert, the position of the law is that the bank does not have the right to withdraw the money unless it is money that is not due you. And so if I have an account with, let's say, Bank A, and then I'm expecting 5,000 cedis as maturity from my bond, the cocoa bond, and the 5,000 cedis hits my account, that is money due me by contract and by law. The bank doesn't have a right to debit my account without my consent. That position has been sacrosanct throughout our jurisprudence on banking. However, the opposite or the reverse, where money that is not due you. So, for example, Emefa, you intended to debit Dr. Frimpong's account, and the difference between my account number and his account number is 2, the last digits.
Okay.
And by accident, you write my account number instead of his account number, and the money hits my account, then it is money that is not mine, that I wasn't expecting. And so it is an irregular credit in my account. And then if I take it knowing that I'm not expecting those funds, then I have, questions to answer with criminal procedure. And
on that cocoa bills note, we'll take a quick cocoa break here on the Joy News Prime. Still to come, the minority in Parliament is raising fresh concerns about the government's gold for oil deal. They insist the deal is shrouded in secrecy.
On government to halt this so-called gold for oil butter and consult further.
You're welcome back to Joy News Prime. Thanks for staying with us. We're also live on myjoyonline.com and all our social media platforms. Now, the minority in Parliament is raising fresh concerns about government's gold for oil deal. The deal, being spearheaded by Vice President Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, has been touted as the deal which will lower the cost of fuel at the pump and help stabilize the Ghana cedis. Already, the first consignment under the deal has arrived in the country, but the minority in Parliament say the deal has been shrouded in secrecy and could, just like the Sino-Hydro butter deal, worsen Ghana's debt to GDP ratio. Minority spokesperson on Mines and Energy, John Jinapo, says their side wants the deal suspended for further consultations.
We are calling on government to halt this so-called gold for oil butter and consult further. Already, the Chamber of Mines has complained. Indeed, if you look at the structure, today, government owes GOIL over 300 million cedis. Government has not been able to pay that amount. Government is not the most efficient partner when it comes to trading. BOST has consistently made losses. PMMC has only 2 offices as we speak, in Accra and in Kumasi. And yet PMMC claims that it wants to buy gold from all the 16 regions. As of 1st January, PMMC decided to ban the export of gold by these licensed gold exporters. Meanwhile, PMMC has not been able to establish the appropriate letters of credit for the agencies. So rather than taking this unorthodox, untested method, I would call on government to engage the small-scale dealers, the bullion dealers, and the licensed gold exporters. So that if it means that you have to increase the percentage of forex that they have to repatriate and reduce the number of days from 30 to say 2 weeks, it makes sense because this will create unemployment. It would encourage smuggling. I checked from the Bank of Ghana website and they have artificially pegged the dollar to around 10 to 11. Meanwhile, these gold exporters tell me that when they sell the gold, the rate at which they sell is at the forex rate, which is over 13. Bank of Ghana should concentrate on its core business and desist from engaging in trading of gold. That is not the job of the central bank. People have licenses to trade in gold. If you need the forex, come up with measures to ensure that the forex is brought back to Ghana. Then you can give these exporters the CD equivalent. It deals with that.
Well, the minority insists PMMC, the state agency which has been mandated by government to purchase the gold which will be used for the butter, does not have the capacity and have been alleging that the central bank may be running through Ghana's gold reserves to sponsor the project. John Jinapo says the BOG must stay off such business and focus on its core mandates, like you've been hearing him say. Well, he also claims the method the government is using will simply fail.
I have had the cause to look at the certificate. And clearly, when you look at the details, you will then come to the conclusion that government is not being honest. My checks indicate that PMMC, the agency tasked to purchase this gold, which will be used as a butter, has not lived up to expectation. If you look at the structure, the small-scale mining companies are supposed to supply about 80% of the gold requirement. And then the remaining 20% will come from the large-scale agencies. PMMC hasn't been able to procure an ounce of gold, as I speak to you, from the small-scale miners. And you can check with PMMC. So the first question is, which gold did they use as butter for this oil? It is important. And let me caution the Bank of Ghana that any attempt to deplete our gold reserves for this so-called oil butter deal would be resisted by the minority. It will be improper and it will be illegal. The gold is part of our reserves and they cannot unilaterally take the golds meant for our reserves to buy this oil. Clearly, this is an attempt to create a further burden for the ordinary taxpayer. We recall that this same vice president told us he was doing a bauxite butter with Sino-Hydro. As we speak, the IMF has insisted, and government has agreed, that indeed, that so-called barter was nothing but a loan agreement. And that has been captured as part of our national accounting system. And it's a debt as we speak. And so when this same Vice President, Dr. Mahmoud Bawumia, come telling you that he's now going to do gold, having failed to deliver on his barter promise with bauxite, I can't say that Kwatra Obama Ontuma Bisanidin clearly fits in.
Well, now students of Krobi Asante Technical and Vocational Institute in the Ashanti region will be surcharged for damage caused to properties before they return to school. 6 vehicles and other school property, including new building projects, were vandalized by rampaging students protesting poor examination performance. Ashanti Regional Minister Simon Osei-Mensah, before the announcement of a 5-member investigating committee, says the government cannot take up the cost of the damaged property. Nanaya Ojima joined the minister and members of the District Security Council to tour the school. Here's his report.
40 students arrested for the rampage are still in police custody as invitation is extended to the student leadership. All students have given their caution statements to the police. Seche East District Director of Education, William Brakon Ejapon, says preliminary investigations have established 3 reasons for the rioting.
What we are hearing are speculations, okay? One of it is that the poor result for that of the exam that they write. They don't write, it is a pure technical school, so they don't write WASI. Yes, so that's what they are claiming. That's what we have heard, that is speculation. But the school has come up with a policy that when it comes to prepping, we don't do this together, okay? It's a mixed school. So the boys have the separate place that they have their prep. The girls have the separate place that they have their preps. Okay? It seems as if this has not gone down well. With the students, they want to have it together. Why do you want to have it together? One also has to do with the fact that they said where they do the ironing, they don't have enough sockets over there. But I know these students, we are not supposed to go to school with mobile phones. So most of them are with these mobile phones.
The rampage started at dawn on Sunday. The students started their distraction by cutting the main power source of the school. The principal's bungalow was the prime target, but an attempt for forceful entry was unsuccessful. A government-owned Isuzu pickup truck parked at the premises was destroyed. They proceeded to the main administrative block to vandalize the school's Mahindra pickup truck, a Nissan patrol vehicle, and the school's bus. The students also turned over a Mercedes-Benz saloon vehicle owned by a teacher. They marched to the apartment of the senior house mistress, hurled stones and other missiles at the building and destroyed a Toyota Vitz car parked in front of the apartment. They forced open the first gate of the apartment and made away with cooked food. The school's food store was ransacked, while installations in newly constructed buildings were destroyed. The rampaging students, after the distraction caused on different parts of the campus, marched to the teachers' premises, that's the teachers' quarters, and forced open the main door. It was at this point that the police intervened and prevented them from entering the various rooms of teachers. Ashanti Regional Minister Simon Osei-Mensah expressed shock at the distraction. He wants the students to pay for the damage.
You see, the Isuzu pickup was purchased in 2020 in the midst of the COVID. You understand it? When all of us were suffering, and then the government squeezed out funds to buy pickups for all institutions, and then you come to destroy it. They have to pay for them. Whatever they've destroyed, they have to pay for. Me, I believe in being fair. Being fair doesn't mean what people talk about, like put human face. All of us here, whose face is animal face?
Rather disturbing situation there from the Ashanti region. We are following up on that story and bring you more on myjoyonline.com as well. Now, 40 years have passed since Ghana last suffered severe hunger and famine. This period of hardship was quite different from any experience in the history of the nation. My colleague Jacqueline and Sumayeboa in the following report recounts this phase through the lenses of those who experienced it up close.
Ghana experienced its worst and most severe drought 40 years ago. This devastating famine began in 1981 and peaked in 1983. Crop yield began to dwindle. Drought and bushfires destroyed many farms. Kwame Moses, a driver, was 14 years at the time and recalls his family lost all their food crops to bushfire.
People were really suffering. It was even difficult to get food to eat, and this was due to the bushfires. There was no rains, and the sun was really bright and hot. There could be bushfires anytime. Farms were getting burnt. Plantains could fall off easily, and we really suffered. I remember in 1983, my father had a farm. That was our main source of livelihood as a family. Unfortunately, one day, when we got there, everything was burnt to the ground.
Some traders jacked up their prices in order to profit from the circumstance. This compelled the government to enact price control measures. Sadly, the military guards posted at the marketplaces to ensure that traders complied with the established rates, flogged and tortured vendors for hoarding items.
I sold plantain during those times. The soldiers will come and sell your foodstuff at control prices. They put you on a table and lash you. By God's grace, I have never been lashed. I've been selling in Malamata even before 1983. People were really beaten. I have been truthful since 1944, so I was not beaten. But if your foodstuff are expensive, the soldiers will sell it at control prices and beat you.
In 1983, when Ghana was in dire straits, Nigerian President Shehu Shagari took advantage of the situation to exact revenge by expelling 2 million illegal immigrants from West Africa, of which more than half were Ghanaians.
If they don't leave, they should be arrested and tried and sent back to their homes.
With more than 2 million illegal immigrants ordered to get out of Nigeria, the resulting chaos is staggering. Hundreds of thousands have now massed at Nigeria's frontier with the tiny West African state of Benin.
This was in response to Ghana's Alien Compliance Order of 1969, where many illegal foreign nationals were expelled from Ghana. At that time, Ghana was unable to cater for the influx of its own people from Nigeria.
Almost 900,000 have already returned to Ghana alone. Most of the illegal migrant workers who've been expelled from Nigeria have been making their way along what used to be known as the Slave Coast, through Benin and Togo towards Ghana.
40 years on, Asari, not his real name, who was 33 years in 1983 and also a deportee, had quite an experience to share with me.
I was in Nigeria for 1 year, when then the security order also came. And when the security order came, we were coming. Our experience on the journey wasn't anything to write about. Unfortunately, we managed to enter Ghana. I mean, before then, we were kept at a Benin, between Benin and Togo border for some days, because Ghana border has been closed for one reason or the other. So when the border was open and we were coming, not knowing they deployed soldiers all along the route, and on our way coming, maybe 2 or 3 soldiers will join your vehicle, and they will march you to transfer. They search you, whatever you have, they say they are going to change it with a bank rate. If you are having the Naira at the time, they are going to change it at a bank rate for you. And then you do your duty or whatever it is. And
Yes, I am Emefa Apawu.
On national
Up
television.
next is AC Nyamiche Thompson with Joy Business.
Yes. We're going to Paris, everybody.